The biggest mistake I see people make when they travel to Tanzania is to go exclusively on safari. And don't get me wrong, safaris are lovely. I've done a few in Tanzania to the Serengeti, Tarangire, and Ngorongoro, and I loved them. A good safari is amazing, but there is so much more to this country than just safari, and if you're only going on safari, you're missing out. So in this video, I want to talk about a few things that you can do in Tanzania besides safari, and specifically I want to focus on cultural activities because Tanzania has some of the best cultural activities out of all of the African countries that I have traveled to, and I believe that they are really, really underrated, but they are so worth the money. They are truly amazing. If you're new here, hi, my name is Laura, and I've been traveling all over the world for the past few years. On this channel, I share lots of travel vlogs, hidden gems, and lots of travel info, so make sure you subscribe if you want more of that. But for now, let's go back into the video. So when it comes to culture and cultural tourism in Tanzania, the most popular activity is probably to visit a Maasai village, and this is an activity that I highly recommend. So just in case you don't know who the Maasai are, they're a very well-known tribe in Africa for their very unique culture, traditions, and lifestyle. Their clothing and their jewelry is very distinctive, and they're also renowned for being very fierce warriors. Something else that always stands out about them as well is that they are semi-nomadic and they are a pastoralist society, meaning that traditionally they move around different places to find the best grazing grounds for their cattle. I have personally been to 3 different Maasai villages in my time traveling around Africa, so one of those villages was in Kenya, the other 2 were in Tanzania, and I highly recommend this activity, especially if you've never interacted with the Maasai before, or if you know little about their culture, because we really don't have any cultures that are similar to the Maasai in Europe or the United States, so it's incredibly fascinating and incredibly interesting to learn about them and about their culture and history. And honestly, if you've been to Maasai villages before, I still recommend that you visit more because you can always learn more, and Maasai culture is again so fascinating, and in my opinion it is so beautiful as well. But if you want to learn about Maasai culture and visit a Maasai village, there's one specific village that I recommend you go to. So this place is called Olpopongi Maasai Village, and it is not like any other Maasai village out there because this place was built specifically with tourists in mind, and it offers a true cultural immersion experience that other villages simply do not offer. So I was in Olpopongi recently, and they have a tour option over there which is 24 hours long. So you arrive in the morning one day, you spend the whole day there just touring the village and learning about Maasai culture, and then you get to spend the night. And I highly recommend this tour. I absolutely loved it. Some of the things I did included a bushwalk where I got to see giraffes in the wild, and where my Maasai guides showed me all of the different uses for different plants and basically explained to me how they survive in the wild when there's no one around. I also met Gogo Yai and had a lovely conversation with her. So Gogo Yai is 109 years old, and I really appreciated talking to her because it is very rare to be able to talk to women in conservative societies, and this was such an open-minded, non-judgmental conversation, so I really got to ask her questions about her life in Maasai culture with very few restrictions, and it was an amazing conversation, honestly. I also got to see demonstrations on how the Maasai make fire and how they throw spears, and I actually got to try this myself, so I got to throw a Maasai spear, and turns out I'm pretty good at it actually. And I also got some really great explanations about Maasai history and Maasai society and culture in this little area they call the Maasai Museum, which was honestly amazing because these explanations are so much more in-depth and so much more interesting than in other Maasai villages that I have visited. We also did a barbecue at the end of the day, and I got to stay in a traditional Maasai house, which is made of materials that are found in the area by the local women, so that was so cool as well. I actually have a full YouTube video about my experience in Olpopongi, so you can see for yourself what it's like and whether you want to go there or not. I will make sure to link it in the description, and also I will link all of the activities that I mentioned in this video in the description as well, so you can book them directly from this video. When it comes to Olpopongi, there's two different options. There's the day tour and the 24-hour overnight tour, which is the one that I recommend and the one that I did. Moving on, I want to talk about the Hadzabe next. So the Hadzabe is a fascinating culture that you can only find in Tanzania. So the Hadzabe are actually the last hunter-gatherers in East Africa, and there's only around 3,000 Hadzabe left in the world. So the fact that they're hunter-gatherers is really important, because this means that they have a very similar lifestyle to the one that all human beings had around 10,000 years ago before the adoption of agriculture. So being a hunter-gatherer means that these people never adopted agriculture, and they still hunt and fish and gather wild fruits and berries and roots to survive. So they still live off of nature fully and completely, which makes them and their culture completely different from anything else that you can see in all of Tanzania or in any other country in Eastern Africa. There are other hunter-gatherers in the African continent, but you can only find them in South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia. So I personally chose to do a day tour to see the Hadzabe, and I got to see lots of super interesting stuff, obviously talk to them, learn about their culture, and one of the coolest things was that I got to hear their language. Their language is very interesting. It's called Hadzabe, and it's very interesting because it's one of the few languages that still uses clicks as consonants. So listen to this. However, I do regret not spending the extra money to do the overnight tour, and there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, like I said, the Hadzabe hunt, and you can actually join one of their hunts, but only if you do an overnight tour, because this takes a bit more time. And also the Hadzabe live pretty far away from big urban centers. They're in a pretty remote area around Lake Eyasi, which is maybe like 3.5 hours from Arusha. So it took a long time to drive there and back, so I didn't get to spend as much time with the Hadzabe as I would have liked. And lastly, if you do the overnight tour, you can also visit a nearby tribe which share a border with the Hadzabe, which is the Dadoga. So if I had done the overnight tour, I would have learned about Dadoga culture as well, but because I didn't, I missed out on that. So needless to say, I really recommend that you do the overnight tour to visit the Hadzabe. And again, I will link to both tours, the day tour and the overnight tour, in my description. Other tribes that you can also see in the area are the Irakwe and the Chagga. So the Chagga live in the area close to Mount Kilimanjaro, and there's a really cool activity that you can do there, which is a hike to Materuni waterfall, which is this beautiful waterfall right here. It's actually the highest waterfall in northern Tanzania, and if you travel during the dry season, you can actually swim in the waterfall. I didn't get to do that because I traveled during the rainy season, but it was still so beautiful. And after the hike to the waterfall, you can do a coffee tour with the Chagga. So the Chagga are very well known for growing and making their own coffee, which is absolutely delicious. Tanzanian coffee is one of the best coffees in the world, and specifically Kilimanjaro coffee is very famous, and it is absolutely delicious. So in this coffee tour, you learn about this specific aspect of Chagga culture, and it is really interesting. It is absolutely fascinating, and at the end of it, you also get to try coffee which is made right there and then, and it is the freshest and most delicious coffee that you will ever have. So if you're a coffee lover and you like learning about culture, this is a tour that you absolutely have to do. Okay, so moving on, I want to talk about Mdowambu. So Mdowambu is a town around an hour and a half away from Arusha, and it's located right on the shores of Lake Manyara. So Lake Manyara is very well known because of Lake Manyara National Park, which is one of the top safari destinations in Tanzania. So a lot of people will actually stay in Mdowambu, but very few people will actually take the time to explore the town. So there is a cultural tourism program here called the Mdowambu Cultural Tourism Program, and I highly recommend it. It was amazing. So what I chose to do is during my safari itinerary, I chose to spend an extra day in Mdowambu to get to do this activity. And obviously you can't learn about 120 cultures in one day, but you can learn about some cultures that you will not learn about anywhere else in northern Tanzania. And the culture that I learned about on the day that I went was the Makonde culture, the Makonde tribe. So I had never heard of the Makonde before, but they're originally from Mozambique, and unfortunately they had to flee the country in the 1970s due to a civil war over there, and they settled in Mdowambu in this part of Tanzania. And they are very well known because they are excellent wood carvers. Wood carving is a huge part of their culture and tradition, and it is passed from father to son. So it is really, really interesting to talk to them and see how they carve and the whole process for that. During the tour, I also got to visit the banana plantations, which Mdowambu is very famous for its bananas. I also got to see the rice plantations and really see how farmers live in this part of Tanzania and what rural life is like in Tanzania. I also got to meet the fishermen in Lake Manyara and go on a little boat ride in the lake. And this tour also includes a traditional Tanzanian lunch, which was so good. This was probably my favorite part of the whole tour, to be honest. But yeah, if you want to know more about Mdowambu, I vlogged my whole experience. It's up here on YouTube, so I'll make sure I leave the link for that in the description as well. And of course, the link to the Mdowambu Cultural Tourism Program and all of the other activities. But it's a vlog that I highly recommend that you watch. I think it's one of my better ones, and it is really, really interesting, honestly. If you're in northern Tanzania, I highly recommend that you do a tour of Arusha as well. So if you're in the north or you're going on safari, you're most likely going to have to go through Arusha at some point and maybe even spend the night there. So why not do a tour since you're already there? I did a city tour on my very first day in Arusha. Again, there is a vlog about that on my channel, which is very funny to watch because it was my first day in Tanzania and I was honestly a bit overwhelmed and a bit nervous, but this walking tour really calmed me down and it was a great introduction to the city and to the country. And I ended up spending 8 days in Arusha because I ended up liking the city. But yeah, I wouldn't say that Arusha is a beautiful city. I wouldn't even say that it has a whole lot of things to do. But if you're a foreigner, it is very, very interesting. And I loved walking around the different streets in Arusha, and especially in the market. I thought that was so interesting. And also going to the bus terminal was chaotic and a bit overwhelming, but honestly looking back, it was really fun. And I also loved going to different viewpoints and seeing different areas of the city and also Mount Meru, which is really, really beautiful. So I definitely recommend that you do a walking tour of Arusha. Speaking of walking tours and Tanzanian cities, another place that I highly recommend you go to is Stone Town in Zanzibar. So Stone Town is Zanzibar's cultural and historical capital. It is so fascinating and very, very beautiful. It is quite small, very walkable, and not nearly as chaotic as Arusha. And the vibes here are so good. The vibes are just immaculate. So I really recommend that you go on a tour with Hadzabe. Again, it will be linked in the description. And I did a tour with him. It was amazing. I loved it. And there's also lots more that you can do in Stone Town, even though it's really small. So there's a food market in the evenings at Forodhani, which I also recommend. And Stone Town Beach, while it is not a beautiful beach by Zanzibar standards, has amazing sunsets. It is a local beach and the vibes here are so good. There's also a few restaurants and a few cafes that are really cute and really nice. So I definitely recommend that you go here if you're planning a trip to Zanzibar. Lastly, also in Zanzibar, I really recommend that you do a spice tour. So Zanzibar is very well known for their spices. They are top quality, and the spice trade historically was very important for Zanzibar economically. So there's lots of history there and also lots of culture. It's really interesting to see how farmers live in Zanzibar and how they grow their spices and what they use their spices for. Because they're not only used for food, they're sometimes used for medicine and even for cosmetics, which I thought was really, really interesting. So this is one of the more popular activities to do in Zanzibar, but one that I highly recommend nonetheless. As a bonus, here are a few cultural tours that I have not done in Tanzania yet, but that I would really, really like to do at some point. So the Mdowambu Cultural Tourism Program also has a similar program in Karatu, which is a city maybe an hour away from Mtowambo, I would say, and it is the city of the Irakwe tribe, so that would be very interesting. And also, I would love to do a walking tour of Dar es Salaam, which is Tanzania's biggest city. You can actually take the ferry from Zanzibar, and it's only like $30 and a couple of hours away, so if I ever go back to Zanzibar, I might do that. And there's also a town north of Dar es Salaam, which is called Bagamoyo, which is really, really historical as well. And it's a small fishing village. From what I've seen, it is very, very beautiful and again has lots of fascinating history. And lastly, I wanted to go to Kilwa so bad. So Kilwa is a city in the coast of Tanzania, further south, and it is a very historical city, and it is part of the Swahili coast. So the Swahili coast, basically the coast of Kenya and Tanzania, had lots and lots of trade links with India and the Middle East, and it has a very, very vibrant history and culture. So Zanzibar, for example, is also part of the Swahili coast. But yeah, I would love to explore Kilwa. I would really, really like to see it for myself. And if you want to go to Kilwa, there's actually a hostel chain that has hostels in Dar es Salaam and in Kilwa, and that will take you there, called the Slow Leopard Hostel. So if I ever go to Kilwa, that's who I'm going to book with. So I thought I might as well let you know. This is not sponsored or anything. I'm not getting any commissions or any payment for saying this, but that is just who I would book with. So yeah, that is all the cultural tours that I have done or would like to do in Tanzania. And like I said at the beginning of the video, if you travel to Tanzania just for safari, that is totally fine. Safari is amazing, but just know that you are missing out, that there is so much more in Tanzania that is really, really worth seeing. And Tanzanian culture is so beautiful and truly amazing. So I really encourage you to do at least some of these activities. Again, like I said before, you can find the links to all of them in the description down below, and also vlogs to YouTube videos that I did of my experiences with some of these cultural tours. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if this video was useful to you. And again, I'm so sorry for repeating this so much. Make sure you check the links in the description.